Hello. Welcome to Why Not Both, the podcast all about how our multiple passions and interests shape our identity and our lives. My name is Pam Schaefer, and I am a musician and therapist in Los Angeles, and I also happen to be your host. This podcast is produced by Laura Studeris, and for this season, we've partnered up with Under the Radar magazine. If you like what you hear, you can hang out with us on social media. We are on Twitter and Instagram at WNB the podcast. And if you really, really like what you hear, please support us on Patreon. We are under Why Not Both podcast. When you join our Patreon, you get a whole bunch of really cool behind the scenes stuff and you get to chat with us. And that's pretty awesome. Thank you so much for your support, and I hope you enjoy our interviews. This week, we were absolutely thrilled to catch up with Shirley Manson, the frontwoman of Garbage, while she is out on tour. She also has a new season of her podcast, The Jump, out now, so I hope you tune in. And in the meantime, I hope you enjoy our chat.
We're official now, Pam.
Exactly, we're official. We're going steady on Zoom.
Fuck yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, welcome to Why Not Both, where I get to chat with you from a blanket fort today.
Thank you. How thrilling.
How have you been? It's been such an unmoored time that I'm just like, how are you?
I'm good. I mean, as good as we can all be under these bizarre circumstances, right? I think this has been a very challenging time for everyone, no matter what side of the coin you're looking at things from. So, it's been challenging for sure. We're currently out on tour with Alanis Morissette and Cat Power, so I really can't complain. I get to do what I love to do, and, we're back out on the road, which, for every musician out there, everyone can relate to this idea of us not being able to do what we're here on earth to do, which is play. Yeah. And it's been very hard, for musicians to keep their shit together, I think. And so I'm very grateful to be out here working for the first time in 18 months. So I really cannot complain. And yet I find that on a daily basis, I do. I was just like, as a Jewish girl from the Valley, I'm like, it's not a bad thing to complain. It just means that you have standards and that you can see places where there can be improvement. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a way of coping with the frustration, right? Because we're all frustrated. It's like maddening, this situation we find ourselves in. And, it's been a lot. Yeah. As it has been for every single person on earth. So there you have it.
Oh, yes. And I feel like everyone's just doing their best in a situation that's been changing, I would say like nearly daily, if not hourly. And it's been very disorienting, and thinking about even being on tour now, I was like, on one hand, I was like, oh, that's so exciting. And then I'm also like, oh my gosh, are you okay? And also like, oh, wow, what are the crowds like? Like, what is that experience like now?
It's a very good question. I mean, it's very, very different from what we're accustomed to, because everybody's masked almost all the time, except for the actual shows themselves. Yeah. And even then, some of the musicians are masked up. We have been blessed by the gods in that all the shows are outdoors. So we are, otherwise we probably wouldn't be out the road, to be perfectly frank, but they're all outdoors, so we've just been so extraordinarily lucky. But there's a lot of protocols in place to keep everybody safe. We were all tested before we went out, and we keep in these, what we call these bubbles. We're all in these quite strict bubbles, and there's very little fraternizing, unfortunately, so we're not allowed any guests really backstage for obvious reasons. And so the usual sort of constant partying of touring has definitely been eradicated, but we all just feel like, we need to work, we need to get out there and work. And so there's a slightly different mindset this time around than any time in my touring career, which extends back to the 1980s. So it's quite weird adjustment.
That's what I was thinking, is that in a way it's almost, I was trying to think of how to basically like kind of bring the energy for a show when those are the circumstances that you're in, that usually you have this like buzzy energy around you because you are around people and you're taking in everything that people bring, even if they're just like hanging out backstage, or like you said, that you're usually fraternizing with other people from other bands and things like that. And I'm like, that's a really fascinating place to be, to then summon that energy from within yourself and from within your little bubble to then give it to the people who are coming to the show.
But that's our job, right? I mean, it's our job to bring the energy. As at least that's how I see it. It's like it's not anybody else's lookout to bring the energy to us. It's like we're in service, I think, to the crowd. That's what we're here for. So I don't have any trouble summoning energy. I never have. It's not been something I've ever had a problem with in my life. I wish actually it was the reverse, that I could fucking chill out a bit.
Well,
but
good thing you're virtually in a blanket cave.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I'm quite comfortable summoning that up and bringing that out on stage. And the receptions we've all enjoyed thus far has been really moving.
Oh.
You know, I mean, really, really moving. Like everyone out there, you know, some masked, some not masked, but at least all outdoors.
Yeah,
has been, yeah, profoundly moving. So
I would imagine, like, I would have a hard time, like, I'm such a sensitive little introvert. I'm like, I would have a hard time not crying. Like, even sometimes when I've performed before, I've nearly wanted to cry, like even under regular circumstance, that I would like, what is that emotion like when you are kind of like being there and, like you said, being of service to the audience, but then feeling the emotions coming back? I was like, oh my gosh.
Well, you know, you're a performer, so anyone, you know, who does what we do understands that emotions come by and without warning. And sometimes the things that you think will bring you to tears don't. And those unexpected moments that you weren't, you know, didn't imagine would strike you, leave you in it with tears pooling in your eyes, you know. So it's an emotional experience, I think, playing music anyway, and entertaining people is, I think, such a privilege. You know, it's, as I said before, I feel like we're in service, you know, of people. And because of social media, there's you know, often I go through a lot of the messages from fans, and they'll tell you things that are just beyond your wildest imaginings about, you know, what your music did for them in their lives, and people they have lost, and circumstances that they have endured, and so some songs just suddenly strike you as, oh shit, that's the song that kid wrote me about last night, you know, or yeah, it's wild. I mean, it's been such a great privilege to be in service of other people. I think to be able to capture something in a song that somehow connects to them in some very private way.
Oh, and it's beautiful. I was listening to some of the episodes of the podcast, and I was wondering what inspired you to talk to other artists about that, because I noticed that theme coming up about like specific songs and what they meant, not just to the artist, but being curious about what they meant to the people listening.
Well, to be honest.
Oh no, you are on mute by accident.
Oh yeah, I got muted.
You've returned.
So sorry.
No, you're okay. I was like, oh no, where did she go?
I thought you said, how was the newt? And I went, the newt? And you went, yes. I said, I have no idea what you're fucking talking about. And then I noticed the mute was on. I apologize profusely.
Yes, it's my secret code. Not only am I in a blanket for it, but now we have newts involved.
That's really funny. I do apologize for that.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was adorable. You said, to be honest, and then you went silent, and I was like, gosh, it's a secret.
That's amazing. God, I apologize. What the fuck were we talking? Oh, I remember the question. Yes. So to be honest, I never conceptualized or imagined I would ever do a podcast ever in my wildest dreams. I got a phone call from Rishikesh Hirway from Song Exploder, and he said, hi, listen, I'm working on this idea for a new podcast, and I really would love you to be the host of it. And I was like, really? And he's like, yeah, think about it. And I mentioned it to my manager, and he was like, you have to do it. You have to do it. You'll be so good at it. You love talking to people, and you're so enthusiastic about music. You have to do it. And I was like, I don't think I can do it. I don't think I know enough about everything, musical. He was like, you're being insane, like just go out and talk to people. And so I agreed to do it more out of fear of being an idiot than really wanting to do a podcast. But then once I started doing it, I found it so rewarding. It was kind of crazy. Like first of all, fell in love with everyone I spoke to. Like literally I was sort of lovesick. Like I had a crush. Like, oh, I want them to be my best friend. I just really want to hang out with Killer Mike and the LP for the rest of my life, and so yeah, it's been something wonderful to come along a point in my career where I'm literally in my middle age, and this has come out like a bolt from the blue and taken me to, basically I go to a masterclass every time I sit down with these people, and I sit and learn. I'm a student, and to be able to do that at my age, at the point of where I'm at in my own career, has been a gift of inspiration, just a Bunsen burner in my heart.
Oh, I love that so much. And I'm having the most meta experience right now, because that's how I feel about podcasting. And I was just like, is it just a hall of mirrors where we fall in love with every guest and are so grateful every time we talk to someone?
Yeah. It's wild, isn't it? My husband thinks it's really funny. He's like, oh my God. Like when I came home from speaking to David Byrne, and Run the Jewels was another one where I came home and he was like, oh my God, like, have I lost you to these people? It's like insane, and talking to Kelsey Lou, I was just like, can we just hang out, please? Can we just please hang out? And it's funny, wonderful.
Well, and it's wonderful because you learn, it's that heartfelt connection where not only are you emotionally connected, but you learn so much. And like those two together, it's so potent. Like my producer gets a message after every interview, because I'm always like, I love them. I love them. I love them.
That's exactly what I'm like. That's hilarious. You understand me, Pam. You understand me.
It's exactly that. And similarly, I didn't think I would start a podcast either. I'd started it a bit on a lark, and it was my producer that really encouraged me. And now it's addictive. It's like once a week, at least, you get to talk to someone and learn something new and engage in a different perspective. And then you get to share that with people. I'm like, I can't think of anything better.
No, it really feels very nourishing and satisfying, and yeah, thrilling. Again, it's thrilling. I spoke to fucking Patti Smith, for fuck's sake. You know what I mean? Like one of my all-time figurehead, like literally a figurehead in my life, not just a musical muse, but someone that I have studied and admired for so long. And to get to speak to her was just nerve-wracking, magical and transportive.
I love that. And I love what you said about that. You emphasized a few times about the point that you're in your career, because I think that particularly we have such an emphasis on youth in our culture, and there are like amazing young artists. However, there's a de-emphasis on not youth, is how I'd put it, where it's like we are learning all the time, and we always can learn something new, and we always can change our perspective. We always can keep expanding. Yeah. And like, I find that so valuable as someone who is, and whatever that generation is, that's like, they keep renaming my micro generation. It's like the Oregon Trail generation or something ridiculous now. Yeah, it's like, I'm a geriatric millennial. I read that one and was like, accurate ?
That is hysterical. I quite like that, geriatric millennial. I'll take it.
Exactly. It's like calling someone like the jumbo shrimp, like you're old young. And I'm like, thanks, I think.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny you should say that, because I really do. I mean, I love young artists. They excite me, and they're bringing a whole new way of looking at the world into play, which is thrilling. Like someone like Grimes or Kelsey Lou, or, they're really coming at things from a different perspective than my generation did. So I find it really thrilling. But similarly, I've always loved older artists. I love old people. Like I love their stories. I love their perspective. They're cool because they're not fighting anymore. Like they're sort of at a place of acceptance of their mortality, and their sort of ambitions are tempered in a different way. And I've always found that really thrilling. I find people of all ages and all, perspectives fascinating, and I'm lucky. I don't know if everyone else is as interested necessarily in an older perspective, and they seem very excited by youth, and that's totally fine too. But I am very blessed that I find all perspectives kind of equally as fascinating.
That's a beautiful way of looking at it. It made me reflect upon the music that like I listened to when I was younger, because I just thought of that I was like, wait, a lot of younger people are listening to music that's made by their peers, which is amazing. But I remember listening to music not only made by my peers, but also people who are then anywhere from like, a few years to decades older than me. Like when I was a teenager, especially.
You're so right, because when I was growing up, it was a matter of principle and pride that you knew what had come before you. And if you didn't, you were kind of ignorant. You were considered really ignorant.
Mm-hmm.
Now I notice young artists have very little interest really in seeing what came before, which I find fascinating. I mean, and I'm not knocking it, by the way. There's something really wonderful about it too. It's just not my personal taste. Like I want to know who did what. Like I feel like there's a whole generation of young artists who literally think they haven't reinvented the wheel, they have designed the wheel. You know what I mean? And they really, really believe it, that they're the first to do this, or they're the first to think this, or the first to encapsulate an idea. And for those of us who have knowledge of artists that preceded them, we all are aware that that's not necessarily the case. But it also allows, of course, for younger generations to be unhampered by the past, and so they're creating these very interesting soundscapes and like visually they're so adventurous and creative.
I love it. Oh no, you're on mute again. Not a newt. There we go.
Am I muted again?
Yes.
I don't know how I keep doing this. How is it possible? I get excited and I think I press it to my cheek and then that mutes me.
I swear my Zoom, like once every 5 to 10 calls, it just will do something like it'll mute me. It'll restart itself. It'll do something where I think it just wants to make its presence known. It's like,
that's fair enough. They're doing a big job here.
They have, when this all started, I remember telling people like, oh, hop on Zoom. And they're like, what's Zoom? And I'm like, oh, it's like Skype, but with slightly better audio. And now like, it's a verb. Like people just say like, we're Zooming. And I'm just like, if you had told me this 2 years ago, I would have been like, what?
It's surreal. Even my dad is 84 years old. He Zooms with his pals. It's like fucking amazing.
Shirley, my parents Zoom, they are 80 and 81. And somehow they crashed the wrong Rosh Hashanah service last year for high holidays. And
that's extraordinarily funny. Brilliant. That is great. That has to go in a script somewhere, for fuck's sake. Amazing.
I was impressed. I was frankly impressed.
Yeah, I'm impressed. That's a good story. I like that a lot.
One of those moments where I was like, I have so many additional questions and I know they don't have answers.
Amazing. That really is funny.
Oh my God. But yeah, thinking about the way people create art, it's almost like, I remember learning about music theory, and it was like it was almost like, oh, there's names to the concepts I already know about. And I had been afraid that it would like ruin what I was making to know theory behind it. And I think about people now where it's like, there's a certain beauty in that arrogance that you're creating something that no one else has created. And in a way that does make you create something no one else has created.
Yes. Yeah, really freeing, I think, in many ways, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then like later you can kind of learn like, oh yeah, people have created variations on that theme, and that doesn't subtract from what I did.
Yeah. It's funny. It's very interesting. That we're really in a very interesting phase right now. I think, even like what I noticed about, people regurgitating other people's ideas, and the original artist doesn't seem to mind. They're like, yeah, it's cool. Like I'm cool with you sort of regurgitating and, you know, reappropriating my ideas and presenting them in a different form. Well, that's kind of fascinating too. I guess it's a form of sampling, right? It's just,
Yeah.
it's interesting to me. It's like, wow, where are we going to go from here? This is wild.
Well, it's a broadening of the landscape. Like, I was thinking about that. You said you're on tour with Alanis Morissette and with Cat Power. And I remember I went to go see, gosh, I was a teenager. I went to go see Alanis Morissette when she opened for Tori Amos, because like I loved seeing Tori and I was so excited Alanis was opening for her. And I remember my friend's dad made this casual joke about, oh, is it the tour sponsored by Tampax?
Oh,
yeah.
awful.
Right. And still clearly that made an impression on me. I remember it like, you know, years and years and years later. And
Definitely.
like, yeah. And I was just like, why would someone make that comment about like, how dare two women be on tour together? That I was just like, why would that be considered a bad thing? And why do we not, like, I was looking at stats on radio, and even now, like, they don't cluster female singers or people with female voices because they assume that listeners won't listen to them. And then I'm like, wait, well, do listeners just not listen to multiple female songs in a row because you're not playing them?
Oh, I mean, don't get me started on this subject. This deserves a podcast unto itself because it's so bizarre and so misogynistic, right?
Yes.
And so, I mean, you know, here comes that awful word again, the patriarchy, you know,
Yep.
that make these weird rules, and then people become accustomed to only hearing men. And so when they hear women, they allegedly say that it's too shrill for their ears, or they don't like female music, or it's absolute nonsense. And like I said, this is something that could go on and on and on. We could literally talk about this for 8 hours straight and never get to the bottom of it. It's very frustrating. I think it's changing slightly currently in this post Me Too movement generation. I think we've got a long ways to go, of course, but you know, evolution continues, and I can only help but hope that things continue to improve for female artists across the board, you know. But yeah, it's the other thing that I noticed that was commonly sort of thrown at us, you know, back in the 90s was we were all angry women in inverted commas, and we were called angry simply because we actually talked about anything other than sex and love.
Yep.
If you talked about anything at all except for sex and love, then you were considered, in inverted commas, angry. It's such a such a reductive term, you know, to throw at a woman who has an opinion about anything, you know. So disappointing and infuriating. But there you go. That was the 90s. I mean, riddled with misogynistic criticism, and mercifully that does seem to have diminished quite considerably over the last sort of 25 years.
Yes, I liked what you said about particularly interviewing younger artists, like younger female and female identifying artists, where it's like, instead of being like, oh, there can be only one. And even the idea of like, when someone is borrowing an idea from another person, it's like, oh, cool, take that idea and run with it. It's more like, hey, there's room for all of us. Like, let's see what you do, as opposed to being like, there's one ring. There's only one ring.
But to be fair, back in the day, there was only one ring.
Exactly.
So that is changing, and so I feel hopeful, and let's leave it at that. And because it's a subject that just is so broad and so terrifying and sad that we could be here all day. And I know that neither of us have the time for that.
It's so funny because like half my brain was just like, yes, 8 hours of talking about patriarchy.
Easily.
It was like, oh my God, do I have enough coffee for that?
It's wild. Wild.
Well, and I'm so glad that you are able to be on tour with, I was just like, I love both of those artists. And so I was just like, that's amazing. I love your artistry. So I was just like, I mean, this sounds phenomenal. And that you are able, like you said, in this era, you are able to do that. And sure, there might be some rogue dad out there being like, oh, the Tampax tour. But for the most part, people are like, oh, how exciting. We get to see musicians that we love. We've been in our homes for 18 months. Like, let us.
Yeah, well, it's funny, you know, like Alanis has one of the biggest, this tour is one of the biggest selling tours of the summer. Like, I'm sure it won't be talked about anywhere, but it is. I mean, I've been told by multiple agents and management companies, that's a highly successful tour, which decries the notion that people aren't interested in female artists. I mean, that's the proof in the pudding right there. And it's also proof in the pudding that Alanis, myself, and Sean Marshall have all had careers that have lasted over 20 years. In my case, 35. But it's a miracle. This is new for women over, let's say, the age of 30.
Yeah.
To en masse have long careers. Yes, there's been a few women in rock and roll who've managed to sustain a career, Patti Smith being one of them, Chrissie Hynde being another, Debbie Harry, Stevie Nicks, but it's few and far between.
Yeah.
And now you're seeing a change to that, and representation is everything. And I think for not just women, but for anyone on the spectrum, gender spectrum, it's great to see a break in that old world kind of cis male domination to be starting to be broken, and other people able to flourish into their middle and how did you put it? Your geriatric millennial lifestyle.
Yes. Where it's just like, do you own a house? No. But does your back hurt? Yes.
Often. But it's good for everybody to see that you don't have to be a young, beautiful, 20-year-old to enjoy your life and be creative and be curious and, be able to do what it is that you love to do. That's great for everyone,
That is such a heartening message. And it's interesting looking at the listeners of this podcast, we have a really wide age range. Like, I was surprised when I looked at our demographics. I was just like, whoa, but it does kind of cluster. It seems around like kind of like mid-20s through like mid-30s. And then there's people on either side. But I think about it, and I think about, it's hard for us to envision a future if we don't have like kind of not role models in the way that we need to necessarily emulate what someone does that we see, but it's like, unless we have a variety of people that are older than us that we see doing a variety of things, it's hard to envision yourself being like, well, what's it going to be like touring when I'm in my 50s? If you don't see another person that's like you touring in their 50s, you're like, well, there's this other person, but they're not quite close enough to my experience that I can't really map myself like onto them. And so
I know, and it's never really existed. Like, what I suddenly realized was I was on tour with Blondie a couple of years ago. Garbage and Blondie co-headlined an American tour, and I was seeing Debbie Harry on stage every night, and she's in her 70s, and I can't begin to tell you what that meant for me to see that. And then I realized, wow, people like Patti Smith and Debbie Harry, they didn't see that. They never saw that. It didn't exist. It wasn't possible. And so it was really thrilling to see that things are slowly changing. And like you say, representation is so important because you can identify with it and say, well, if she can do it, there's no reason why I can't in my 70s and have I look at Debbie Harry's career still. It's like, look at this magnificent person in her 70s, still living her best life. Patti Smith is still making art that moves generations, whether it's with her writing, with her music, with her presence, it's just extraordinary and it's exciting and it's good for everyone to see that.
Yes. And to have that kind of multifacetedness, like you just brought up, like Patty's writing. I was thinking about that when you were like, oh, I surprised myself with the podcast. And I was like, oh, relate to that one. It's like sometimes you can reach out into another art form, even if it's something you never anticipated, and be like, oh yeah, I can do that too. And it's not about like, am I going to be the best at this? It's more like, oh, I want to go explore this. This freaks me out. I should do it.
Exactly. Isn't it that amazing? Is it Eleanor Roosevelt who says, do something every day that scares you?
Yes.
Is that her quote, or is it I can't remember who actually said it, but anyway, it's such a great quote, of just like, you have to, if you get too comfortable, I think it's very dangerous. And really the major distinction between older people and younger people, aside from obviously their flesh is so much more beautiful to look at than ours, is that young people continue to put themselves in, uncomfortable situations. As we get older, we decide not to, but I think it's important often in order to maintain a sort of adventurous life, which keeps you young, is always do something new. I'm not saying you have to go out and fucking, put yourself in physical danger or anything like that. But yeah, take up a writing class, go and do join a fucking hill walking group. I mean, make sure you expand your circles always, always, always.
Yes.
I think that's really important.
Yes, because you never know what you're going to discover.
Yes, Pam. Yes. Under the blanket with you. Yes.
I was like, you're in the blanket for it. I have to somehow figure out how to send you photos of this, because my friends low-key throw a party every year usually, but obviously during the era of Corona, they can't, but they transform their whole house into a blanket fort, like using like PVC pipes and
I love that.
Lights, and it's their annual 4th of July.
Oh, that's lovely. Blanket fort with sparkly lights. Lovely.
It's the best. And so I'm glad that I get to experience it. Like I said, I was, booted out of my home by construction. And then and I've never recorded in a blanket fort before.
Indeed. That's a silver lining to every cloud.
It's all about like, make yourself just uncomfortable enough.
Exactly.
Don't like throw yourself in front of a bus. That's too uncomfortable.
Yes, don't go. Please, listeners, don't go and do anything silly like that.
No, it's about just find that little edge of discomfort and kind of nudge it a little bit.
Well, like my dad is 84, as I mentioned earlier, and he's always doing something, whether he's volunteering for the Writers' Museum or whether he's got a Robert Louis Stevenson fan club that he's very involved in. And he has a younger spirit than many 30-year-olds that I know have. Yeah. Like, he is like fucking still in the game, my dad. And it's really impressive to see. He's lost his beloved wife. He's physically struggling a little, but he's still in the game. And I think that is so commendable and so exciting still, and I'm very grateful to my father for being such a great example of aging sterility.
I was like, heck yeah, good dads. Like, my dad's really into ham radio and volunteering and like same thing. He has like, by the way, Robert Louis Stevens fan club just touched my Stevenson fan club. I couldn't even say that correctly, because I was like, I touched my heart when you said that. I was like, oh, that is so precious.
It is precious. It's really precious.
Oh my God. Yeah. And like seeing someone in that phase of life, and especially like you said, that's experienced loss and that's experienced all these things, and he's still like, hey, I'm going to go express my enthusiasm.
Yeah.
Like, I'm gonna.
Yeah. It's really lovely.
Oh,
life is good. We're all so lucky. We're all alive. So it's a miracle.
Oh my gosh. I can smell the food that my friends have made me downstairs. I was like, oh my gosh, you've been so generous with your time. I was like, I have no idea how long we were supposed to talk for.
I don't either, but I'm about to talk to my hero Janice Long from the BBC in Wales. So I better get going. I have no idea what time it is either. But I thank you so much. And I've loved speaking to you, and I feel like we're sisters from another mother. So thank you for your time, Pamela.
Oh, thank you for your time, Shirley. I'm so glad that I was just like, we share the podcast love. The podcast
we do.
Love. I was like, thank you, my sister from another mister.
You're very welcome. And send my very best to that father of yours.
Oh my gosh. Yours as well. May they meet across the airwaves in some obscure esoteric fan club.
Amen, sister. Cheerio.
Have beautiful travels.
Yes, darling. Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you again for listening to this episode of Why Not Both. If you liked what you heard, please make sure to like us and subscribe to us on your preferred podcast platform. You can also come hang out with us on social media. We are at WNB the podcast, both on Instagram and on Twitter. This season, we are brought to you by Under the Radar magazine. Under the Radar is a nationally distributed print, music, and entertainment magazine and website. You can find them at www.undertheradarmag.com, and feel free to support them on Patreon. Extra special thanks to our producer, Laura Studeris, who is literally a rock star. Thanks again, and I look forward to seeing you next episode.